I am totally it's like the Democratic convention. I'm awesome.
All right, can we have everybody seated? Good morning. My name is Marcia Borders, First Vice President of SUAA UIC United. On behalf of President Gassman and UIC chapter, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the UIC community, visitors, and guests. I think you'll find this morning's program to be both informative and insightful. Please join us in the foyer at the conclusion of the program for refreshments and conversation. And I see a lot of familiar faces, but just for your information, the washrooms are at either end of the corridor and just around the corner. And if you have not already done so, I would ask that you please silence all electronic devices at this time. I need to do that with my phone, but I can't do it right now. And finally, I would be remiss if I did not invite you to consider membership in SUAA, the organization that advocates on behalf of current employees, retirees, and their spouses, and makes it possible for us to offer programming like this. So please stop by our membership table in the foyer for any additional information. And at this time, I think I'll turn the program over to Dick Johnson, who will introduce the moderator and our distinguished panelists. Dick?
Good morning. This is the 7th annual Public Policy Forum presented by UIC United. The first forum was held in September of 2006 on a topic similar to the one we're discussing here today. And the subtitle of that forum was Fixing the Mess. In looking through my old notes, I found something from the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability saying that Illinois had the largest pension debt in the nation at $42 billion. We know what has happened. Would we only have $42 billion debt at this time? It would be wonderful. A majority of our forums have discussed this issue over the years of debt and revenue problems in the state, and except we did have one on public corruption in Illinois, which it may have gone away, I'm not sure. And on the proposed constitutional convention of a few years ago. The mess has continued practically unabated in the ensuing years, in spite of the work of 2 pension system modernization task forces and a recent governor's working group. Both houses of the legislature have also spent much time and effort on pension, quote, modernization, unquote, and what is euphemistically referred to as pension reform. All of these terms are in parentheses, of course. To me, the major thrust of all this has been devoted to trying to find ways to save money and lots of it. There seems to be general agreement that Illinois pensions are about average nationally, and that the difficulty stems from the unwillingness or inability of the state to come through with its share of the funding. You've heard it many times, but I know, but I'll repeat it again. Most of the people in this room have paid their dues in terms of if you're an active employee. When you're an active employee, you paid your 8% per year. The state has not always paid its 8%, as you know. And this underfunding, of course, is heard in a couple different ways. One major way is that it deprives the systems to do the level of purchasing, of raising money through its funding. It is a complicated issue. It's a highly political issue. There have most of this issue stems from outside the system. Although I think we have to recognize that there have been some abuses that have had to be taken care of. Plus, there have been what I call enablers, where issues have come up over the years, and some of the institutions have been in the position of having to make a choice between getting the money in the future through pension funding or through getting the money now rather than waiting for the future. And the now means to handle operating costs. Pensions are, as we know, at the center of this perfect political storm. But pension reform is often, seems to be viewed as the answer to this revenue problem. That, well, we'll hear more about that today. I hope that the discussion here will lead to more enlightened public discourse on these matters. And to lead us in this enterprise, we have a distinguished panel that I'll briefly introduce. We have, starting at the far end of the table, John Tillman, the CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute. Catherine Cappy Lang, the Executive Director of the Illinois Office of Governmental Relations of the University of Illinois. Ralph Marteri, who is a real veteran of these panels we've had over the years. I told someone here he has tenure on this panel. And,
It's not pensionable, though.
no, that's right. That's right. We should consider that, though, right? Okay.
I wouldn't count on getting it.
And our moderator for this is Eric Zorn, columnist for the Chicago Tribune, that I'm sure many of you have seen his article. His most recent one was this morning. Yeah. And for many of us, his writing is a must. So I will turn it over to Eric, who will be the moderator. I put some reserved things down there because Ralph is going to have a presentation, as will John, and I wanted to speakers to have a chance to view them. So anyway, Eric, it's all yours.
Thanks. I'm not going to talk much because most of what I know about pensions comes from reading papers that are issued by John and Ralph and talking to experts about this. I write about pensions fairly often. It's a subject that fascinates me. I think it's one of the most urgent topics going right now in the state of Illinois. The last figures that are out there are $83 billion pension underfunding, which in turn has its own reverberating effect, which is that it hurts our state's credit rating. The Civic Federation a couple years ago estimated that the extra cost of borrowing based on our credit downgrades is costing Illinois taxpayers an additional $500 million a year. Does that sound about right to you guys, or all three of you? So this is a problem that is metastasizing. We don't have any kind of handle on it. I think there are two really big questions out there that are related, even though we may not want them to be. One is, how did we get here? How did we get to the position that we're in? And two, how do we get ourselves out of it? And those two questions work together in a way that creates or doesn't create political will. That's going to be needed, a lot of political will. And then there are, of course, a bunch of ancillary questions such as who is going to feel the pain as we get out of this $83 billion plus hole, and how do we fairly apportion that pain? I'm not going to start with a lot of long remarks. That's about it for me. We're going to go, Catherine Lang is going to go first. She's going to talk, and then Ralph and then John are going to give a presentation. And then after that, I hope we can have a 3 to 4-way conversation, followed maybe by some Q&A. And by that time, we should have solved this. You fixed the mess in 2006. I'm not sure why we're back here, but.
Thanks, Eric. As Eric said, my name is Kathy Lang. I'm the University Director of Governmental Relations. I'll just start out with a little bit of history. 2006 is sort of near term in terms of talking about the pension problems. The state started to underfund public pensions, I guess you'd say cheat on its share, back when I started working in government back in 1983. And at that time, nobody noticed because it was such an esoteric way to make the state budget stretch a little longer. And so the budget makers were able to get away with it for a long period of time until we got to the 90s. And in the Edgar administration, the state put itself on a payment plan. And sometimes you've heard about the ramp. The state decided it would increasingly step up its payment towards the unfunded liability until it was covered. The steps got larger as the years went out, and as we got into those out years, those steps were too big to take, so we started to borrow to pay the payment. And so now, in addition to the unfunded liability, we have the pension obligation bond debt to pay off. And so that brings us to 2006, when the think tanks and the panel started getting to work on this question. And I think it was thought still in those days that there was kind of a way to pay your way out of this dilemma. But now, here we are in 2012, the second year in which pensions have dominated the agenda of the Illinois General Assembly. And the proposals that are being brought forth now actually attack the benefits of the Tier 1 employees. So 3 years ago, was it, Ralph? We did take a stab at pension reform and imposed a 2-tier system in which employees hired after January 1st, 2011 would pay a large amount of their pay into a fund that at the end of the day would provide them a very inferior benefit. So I don't think anybody now is talking about Tier 2, although in a minute I'm going to, because it's really important to the University of Illinois. So the current conversation is all about Tier 1. It's all about the people who were employed by the state prior to 2011, which of course is almost everybody. Another form of pension reform that happened this spring was there was a 100% increase in people who were able to retire taking their retirement. This is a way people felt that they could lock in their benefits, lock in their their money purchase plan in the case of the universities. So that's another thing that's kind of in play here as we talk about pensions, is people are trying to figure out how to position themselves so that they can get the most value from their pension. And in addition, this year, as you all are certainly aware, the Illinois General Assembly passed legislation requiring retirees to pay a portion of their health insurance premium. So that all of these things are in the backdrop as we talk about pensions this morning, and I'm noticing that it's an almost capacity crowd, so wow, thank you guys all for coming. I want to say why this matters to the University of Illinois. Three things are really important to the university. First, it's imperative that steps are taken to relieve the pressure on the state budget. Eric alluded to the $83 billion weight that is around our neck. We're paying it off. Last year's full payment was $5 billion right off the top of the budget. That's money that's not available for assistance with tuition at higher public universities. It's not available to K-12 education. It's not available to any of the social services that the state provides. It's just right off the top for that payment. The General Assembly is highly motivated to find ways to reduce that. And one of the things that they've talked about last year was shifting a portion of the normal cost to the public employer. And I'm sure that you guys all know what normal cost is because you've been following pensions all these years. But normal cost is the actuarially determined cost that we would pay today for the future benefit. So it's apart from this unfunded liability, it's apart from the pension obligation bond, it's just the plain old cost of the pension. It's about half of the what we're paying annually, $5 billion. The rest is all going for these other matters. So we have to get out from under this burden on state debt. The second reason we've got to address this is we've got to tell our current employees and future employees what are their benefits. It's not fair to leave all these people in the system in a limbo of not knowing what's going to happen. We must act, it's only right. And third, from the standpoint of the university as an employer, it's really important for us, because we operate in a competitive market, to know what are going to be the fringe benefits of employment going forward so that we can offer them to future employees as part of the employment package. And if we must do it, to find ways to augment the state's Tier 2 pensions to make them be competitive. And so last spring, one of the proposals that came out of the Illinois Institute of Government and Public Affairs was a Tier 2 specific improvement that would create what we were calling a hybrid plan that would allow all public employers to do more for their Tier 2 employees than the current law provides for. And if you want, I can go into that in detail. It'll probably make you take a nap. But that's kind of the overview of where we are right now. I think that these gentlemen have revenue suggestions of how we can get out of this predicament. The university doesn't have a position on taxation. We've been willing to talk about a cost shift, and we could remain interested in being part of the conversation in Springfield. But I hope that this morning will introduce some new ideas and we can have a good conversation of them. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ralph Martiri. I'm Executive Director of the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability. And you know, it's interesting, Dick Johnson mentioned that you'd held a past forum on public corruption. And assume if it was a how-to seminar, it was loaded with public officials, right? Get some of the tricks they needed. We, in the state of Illinois, have a real problem that requires a bipartisan solution. And that's why my organization is focused on helping fix this pension problem. We happen to be bipartisan, so my board of directors has prominent Democrats and Republicans on it who both mistrust and dislike each other. And that is a really good thing, because it allows our organization to focus on data and best practices. I don't think, though, you can talk about the pension problem. In fact, I'm going to change the definition of it. Spoiler alert, the pension system didn't cause the problem, and I will demonstrate that. This is, in fact, a debt problem. And I want you to start thinking about it that way, because if we don't think about it that way, we will never solve the problem. We can't solve any problem without understanding how we got here. So first of all, sort of where are we today? And this is one of the first years that we are subject to spending caps in our general fund. And what will we spend our money on? So our overall appropriations, which is planned spending for the items that are subject to our cap, is about $33.7 billion. Of that amount, 9.3 is hard costs, and these hard costs are debt service on pension and capital bonds, statutory transfers out, primarily that's the local government distributed fund, so local governments across the state, but it also includes things like, for instance, the Medicaid bill repayment, and the pension contribution, which Kathy noted was just over $5 billion for fiscal year 2013. There you see the exact number, 5.099. Then we have to repay some bills. We're going to repay at least $800 million of $500 million backlog in Medicaid, $300 million backlog of other bills, leaving us a general fund appropriation gross for services this year of $24 billion. And you see how that's spread out. So we are going to spend $6 billion on pre-K through 12th grade, et cetera, et cetera. However, no one can anticipate actually getting a full appropriation, because whatever the budget says is going to be reduced by that $650 million figure. So even though they say they're going to spend $24.1 billion on services, there's a line that says $650 million of this will never be spent. We don't know which lines will be hit by that, but they are planning in advance to cut spending by at least that figure this year. So bottom line, we're going to spend on public services $23 billion. Over time, you can look at from 2012 to 2013, you can see that many of these public services are lined in for cuts, and this is just a nominal dollar comparison, meaning there's been no adjustment for inflation. So you go to look at higher ed is going to be cut by 5% from last year level, pre-K through 12, 3%, etc. Public safety, general services, whatnot. All right, so are we really going to be able to even spend that $23 billion? And our answer at CTBA is no. And our answer for that is based on this little walk-up, walk-down figure. So our revenue for 2013 is only projected to be $33.7 billion, that top line. Our hard costs, remember that we have to pay, 9.3. Deficit carry forward from 2012, according to the Comptroller's Office, has now hit $9 billion. That's the most recent. So that's in unpaid bills left over from 2012. These are for services that were provided. We just haven't paid for them yet. So that means after we pay our hard costs and our deficit carry forward, there's only $15.4 billion in revenue left to cover the $23.5 billion in appropriations. That's an $8 billion deficit, 34%. So where we stand today is a 34% deficit in the budgeted appropriations. And that's after accounting for about $650 million in cuts for that unspent appropriation line, okay? So it's not a pretty picture. 34% is a big percentage of the budget, especially when you think about what the budget gets spent on. 9 out of $10, education, healthcare, human services, public safety. So when you talk about across-the-board cuts to deal with the deficit, it's really helpful to keep in mind what the board is. This is the board. It's education, healthcare, human services, and public safety. And by the way, that's historic spending in Illinois over the last 30 years, and that tracks other states. Most states, and give a percentage point or two, spend their general fund revenue roughly along these lines. So 9 out of $10 goes to those core services. We've got a 34% deficit in paying for what we've appropriated for those services this year. Now, I would support additional spending cuts as part of the deficit solution problem if, in fact, ramped up spending was a major driver of the deficit over time, but it doesn't look like it is. The first column compares spending in the year 2000 to 2013 in just nominal dollars, no adjustment for inflation. You can see it looks like we're spending 17% more this year on services than we did back in 2000. But everyone knows that the economy drives up the cost of delivering services year to year, as does population growth. That second bar adjusts for inflation and population, compares this year's spending levels to 2000 using the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. Now, you can see, just using the CPI, we're actually going to be spending 20% less on education, health, human services, and public safety this year than we did in the year 2000, in real inflation-adjusted terms. Now, the problem with that is it's the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Great inflation metric for the economy as a whole, not so much for public services. Why? Well, it includes things like Clorox bleach and Twinkies and hair care products. State government doesn't buy a lot of Clorox bleach or Twinkies, or since Blagojevich has gone, hair care products. What state government purchases is labor. 80 to 90% of every line in the state budget is the money appropriated to pay the wages of the workers delivering the service, be they education professionals, healthcare professionals, social service workers, etc. There is an inflation metric tied to the cost of labor over time, and the changes in that, it's the employment cost index. So basically, our spending levels today could purchase about 23.9% less in the level of public services than they did just in 2000. So it clearly isn't spending on services that's driving the deficit. In fact, if you take a long-term view of spending, whether it's pre-K through 12, higher ed, et cetera, you can see after adjusting for inflation and population, from 2000 to 2013, every service area is cut significantly. Look at that 40% hit to higher ed, by the way. The Blagojevich administration really took some major shots at higher education when it was in there cutting expenditures there. But even one of the sort of sacred cows of spending, pre-K through 12 education, which everyone thinks goes up in real terms every year, and historically did in Illinois until the middle 2000s, even that has been cut in real terms. So if it's not out of control spending that's been driving these problems, what is it? Well, number one is bad tax policy. That's been our biggest driver of these problems. We just don't have tax policy that will raise revenue the way you're supposed to in a modern economy. That poor tax policy led to irresponsible fiscal practices. Note that the Great Recession did not cause any of Illinois' problems. Certainly made it worse. But the causes are structural. They're built into the structure of our fiscal system. They are not temporary. They won't go away once this magic Great Recovery becomes robust, if in fact that ever happens. All right. So the principles of good tax policy, there's four of them. It needs to be fair, responsive, stable, and efficient. This is Capitalist Taxation 101. Pick up any textbook on fiscal policy. Those are the things you need for your tax system to work. Illinois is 0 for 4. We don't do any of that. So not surprisingly, that creates problems. This just takes current law and models it out into the future. The blue line shows the cost of maintaining current service levels and paying the pension ramp. Just adjusting for inflation and population growth on the services, the pension ramp is what it is, so that's in there as it is, no adjustment. The red bar is what our revenue system will generate, once again adjusting for inflation and population changes and assuming a normal economy. The gap between the growth in revenue and the growth in maintaining your services over time is our structural deficit, literally built into the structure of how we tax versus the cost of the services we provide. That picture tells you we can't afford to do tomorrow the same level of services we're doing today, and the level of services we're doing today is almost 25% lower in real terms than it was in 2000. That's the reality. This drop in the revenue line, that's when our temporary tax increase begins to phase out. So the year-to-year drop in revenue will be significant. The first year that phase out will lose about $3 billion or so in revenue. By the time it's fully phased out the following year, we will have lost $7 billion from 2 years prior. That's not the biggest challenge. We can make that temporary tax increase permanent. Haven't solved our problem. Why? Look at the rate of growth here. Look at the slope in the revenue line. Look at the slope in the cost line. Even if you are exactly balanced, they will diverge because our costs grow with the economy, but our revenues do not. That's a loser proposition. It has in fact been going on in Illinois. It was first identified in Illinois in 1980 by Jim Nolan, a Republican economist. And by the way, Cappy, they started dipping into the pensions in the 80s. And so there you go. The structural deficit has existed for a while. This is what the year-to-year revenue loss will look, or deficit growth will look like over this period of time, just to make a nice pretty picture for you. So our current system isn't sustainable, but the irresponsible fiscal practice it begot was underfunding the employer normal cost to the pension. Let me put that another way. Since 1980, the state of Illinois has borrowed against what it owes the pension system to paper over a structural deficit and fund services. So since 1980 at least, the pensions have been subsidizing service delivery in Illinois against their wills. There's actually nothing inherent in the pension system that caused the problem. We ran up a ton of debt to it. Now, I have a question for you. Think hard. If we ran up this debt to a bank rather than the pension systems, would we all be trying to figure out a way to make the bank's employees pay for the debt that we borrowed from them? I'm thinking not. Would we be trying to find a way out of paying what we owe the bank? I'm thinking not. Would we have set up a repayment schedule that we know we couldn't afford or attain and the bank knew too? I'm thinking not. But that third thing is exactly what the state did. So, as Kathy mentioned, we got a pension ramp deal cut in law passed in 1995, and I'm trying to stay within my time limit, which is so hard for me. But under that pension ramp, we started with an unfunded liability in 1994 of $17 billion, which, by the way, was doubled in 5 years from 1989. And we grew it by law to over $40 billion. So for the first 15 years of the ramp, by law, we continued to borrow against the pensions to fund services. Taxpayers have had a great deal. They've been able to consume services without having to pay full freight for them since 1980. The debt just happens to be owed to the pension system, so it's called a pension problem, when in fact it is a borrowing problem. All right. Here are the contributors to the growth in the unfunded liability according to the Nonpartisan Commission on Government Forecasting and Analysis. And you can see salary increases and benefit increases had very little to do with it. Investment returns tanked during the Great Recession. Oh yeah, what's this big number? That's the growth in unfunded liability due to not making the pension payment as you should. Always, historically, the biggest part of it. These two things, other factors, changes in assumptions, people live longer, we had early retirement options, things like that, that created some costs. But no, if we hadn't underfunded the pensions, you take together the liability from everything other than the Great Recession, so everything allocable to the pension systems themselves, and today we'd be 89%, maybe 90% funded. Does that sound like a pension problem? No! It is a debt problem. So, it's amazing to us that in fact the focus has been on taking away benefits rather than figuring out how to pay the debt that's owed, when in fact benefits were not the driver of this problem. I'll give you one more numeric example of that to try to drive home the case. Today, in 2013, our pension contribution will be, as I put on the board, $5.099 billion. Last year in 2012, it was $4 billion. It's an increase of $1 billion in pension payment year to year, by law, statutorily required. How much of that do you think is due to benefit increases or benefit payments at all? Zero. It is all debt. In fact, the employer normal cost in 2012 was $1.6 billion out of the $4 billion. And in 2013, it declines to $1.5 billion because so many people have been running out of the system that there are less employees to pay for. It's all debt repayment. This is what the debt repayment amortization schedule looks like that the state is living with. Now, I think I'm good on tax policy. I really do. I can't design a revenue system that jumps like this from year to year and covers the inflationary cost and service growth. I can't do it. Can you do it? No! So two things have to happen if we want to honestly solve the problem. This ramp has to go out the window. We have to re-amortize the debt into a payment schedule we can actually afford, like we should have done the first time. Has to happen. If we don't do that, it's game over, and I'm going to show you slides on that. Second, we need to change the revenue system so it grows with the modern economy. Those are the two solutions that absolutely have to be on the table, and if they are not on the table, no matter what you do to employee benefits, you won't solve the problem. Here's some numbers on that. So, Governor Quinn has put a couple of options on the table that would significantly reduce retirement benefits to existing and former workers. Option one, I'm not going to run through all the details of it, keep your current 3% compounded cost of living adjustment, lose your retiree health care, blah, blah, blah. Option two, accept the reduced COLA, the lesser of half a CPI every year, or 3%. Keep access to your health care programs, etc. Here is the long-term changes to our repayment schedule that those reforms would implement. So the current schedule, from 2013 to 2045, we'd have to pay $309 billion. That's what the ramp would do, those ever-escalating payment increases. Under option one of Quinn's proposal, and by the way, because we're kind of Pollyanna-ish, we're just going to assume Quinn's proposal is constitutional. We're not taking a position on that right now. May or may not be. We're assuming it is. We're also assuming the governor will actually get the revenue savings he claims. Once again, we don't think he will, and we don't think he'll have anywhere near the uptake in these programs he needs to get to generate these numbers. That said, we're giving him his numbers as he says they are. All right. Under option one, over that same time period, the pension payment would decline from $309 billion to $243 billion. Savings of $66 billion. Under option two, it declines all the way from $309 billion to $227 billion, a savings of $82 billion. Total savings either 24 or 26%, take your pick. Here's how it changes the ramp. Red line is existing law, blue line is option one, green line in option two. In what fantasy universe will the state be able to make those payments under any scenario? With a revenue system that does not even grow with inflation over time. You don't solve the problem by taking benefits away from workers. You still have the pressure created on the fiscal system by an unrealistic, unaffordable, unattainable repayment schedule. You don't fix this, you haven't solved the problem. Was that unclear? All right. So, as a lot of you know, the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability has taken the position we actually need revenue enhancements. The two we have put on the table are expanding the state sales tax base to include consumer services. This is a picture of why we do that. In 1965, services were 36% of Illinois' economy. The sale of goods were 32%. By 2008, services had jumped to 60% of Illinois' economy. Sale of goods were 12%. Which of those two bars do you think we tax, and which of those two do you think we don't? Right. We tax goods, we don't tax services. Does that look a lot like the structural deficit? But better yet, of the 46 states in the nation with a sales tax, we have the third most narrow base. We exclude far more services than virtually any other state in the country, including all of our Midwestern neighbors. In fact, of the services we think we should tax, Missouri, Kentucky, and Indiana already tax anywhere from like 20 to 40, 50% of them. Iowa and Wisconsin tax all of them. All of them. And I don't know about you, I haven't seen these busloads of people from Iowa and Wisconsin coming here to get their haircut, a service they tax and we don't. Now, if you've seen their haircut, suggest they come, because they're really not very nice. But the bottom line is, if we don't fix our revenue system to grow revenue in accordance with the way the modern economy is structured, it's game over no matter what you do on the expenditure side. All right. We also think the state should have a graduated income tax. There's a lot of reasons for that, but Adam Smith is one of my reasons for it. This is the quote directly out of The Wealth of Nations. You know what Adam Smith is, right? Came up with capitalism in the 1750s and the wealth. All right. The subjects of every state ought to contribute toward the support of government as nearly as possible in proportion to their respective ability. That is, in proportion to the revenue they enjoy under the protection of the state. And in case you didn't understand what that means, he clarified. As Henry Home, Lord Keynes, has written, goal of taxation should be to remedy inequality of riches as much as possible by relieving the poor and burdening the rich. That's not Karl Marx. That is Adam Smith. It's a great argument for a graduated rate structure, and Adam made the argument, now I'll paraphrase him instead of quoting him, because he believed in a capitalist economy that folks at the top of the income ladder would always benefit disproportionately greater than everybody else. Now that's not evil or immoral, but it's how the system's going to work. So since they're going to get a disproportionately great benefit, they should have the greatest tax burden as a percentage of income to pay for the government that helps line their pocket. Was Adam right? This is an analysis done by a couple of university professors of U.S. income tax data from the Internal Revenue Service on shares and income growth over time. From 1947 to 79, you can see the wealthiest 10% got 34% of all income growth in America. This is adjusted for inflation, so this is real terms. Bottom 90% got 65%. So certainly a disproportionate return to the top over the bottom and middle. It got much worse from 1979 to 07. And 07, it's important that it's ended here because that keeps out the impact of the Great Recession. Right? So these numbers aren't chilled by the Great Recession. You look at this and it flipped. The wealthiest 10% from 1979 to 07 got 63% of all income growth in America. 2/3. Leaving only 36% for the bottom 90. So Adam had a pretty good handle on the distribution of income in a capitalist economy. It disproportionately goes to the top. So you need a graduated income tax rate structure like you have at the feds to respond to that very real economic condition. Illinois is the opposite of progressive. We are regressive, with the bottom 20, 40, 60%, 80% all paying more than 10% of their income in state and local taxes, whereas the wealthiest 1% only 5.3% of their income. That doesn't work, it's not fair, and it helps lead to the structural deficit. So our other suggestion is to create a graduated rate structure in Illinois. The one that we've modeled out would cut income tax rates for everyone, or income tax payments, I should say, for everyone earning $150,000 a year or less. 96% of the state would get a tax relief, whereas 4% of the state would pay more in income taxes. How much more? It'd be about $2.4 billion more than what we collect today with a flat and unfair tax. So if you combine these steps, you tax more fairly, more responsibly to the modern economy, and you throw an unattainable, unaffordable repayment structure out the window, you'll actually solve the debt problem. Thank you.
I have to move Ralph's laptop, although I have to say I'm tempted to just give my presentation from his same slides. But I won't.
Introduce yourself. Just
I will. John Tillman, I'm the CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute. And Ralph and I have done a number of things. We've been on the radio together, TV together, lots of things. And it's always fascinating. Ralph?
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome. He's chock full of data. And what's always fun for me is how two people can look at the same situation and see the world so entirely differently. So while I fire this up, let me just ask you, how many of you currently are in the state's retirement system in some form or fashion? Show of hands. Yes, that's kind of what I thought would be the case. And secondly, I would like to point out that how many of you read Eric Zorn's column? Very good. So you know Eric's point of view pretty well. And I think you have heard what Ralph's point of view is. My point of view is going to be very different than all of yours, probably, and certainly different than Ralph's. And although I will say this about Eric, one of the things I love about Eric's column and why I read it almost every day, though I have not read it today, Eric, is that Eric is a very, he clearly has a point of view, as do I, but he is a fair player and gives everybody a fair shot. He and I have done a few debates, and he certainly has given me my opportunity to get my point of view out. So I'm going to start, though, before I get busy with my slideshow, which will be much briefer, with just a couple of things. Let me begin with a very simple premise. Roughly speaking, I haven't looked at the numbers exactly like Ralph has, but very close. 43% of the problem in the unfunded pension liability is because of essentially stealing the pension payment by various Republicans and Democrats and governors of both parties over a long period of time. No argument with that at all. There's all kinds of other reasons that the system is corrupt, frankly, from the beginning. They've been using an 8.5% discount rate, which, as you all know, is a fantasy land, and the Government Accountability Standards Board has just issued its most recent ruling on what a proper discount rate should be. If you fold that in and use a Moody's model, Moody's rating system, essentially that $83 billion skyrockets to about $183 billion when you take that into consideration. So we have no argument in terms of the scope of the problem or the primary cause of it is. The other thing that I have no argument with, just to be clear, is our position is and remains that the people who've been most shortchanged by this irresponsibility in Springfield is all of you. All of you have been sold a bill of goods for a very long time by the politicians in Springfield, and to be very honest with you, which you're not going to want to hear, but I'm going to tell the truth as I see it, by your union leaders, who for many, many years have together been signing off on these deals, and the people that are most at risk are you. The people that are counting on that money being there have planned your whole life around that money being there, and the taxpayers who fund everything. One of the things I always like to point out when we talk about extracting more revenue from the economy is that doesn't come out of a magic potion bag. That comes out of a citizen's wallet, their business, or some other part of the economy. All source revenue for every dollar of salary that a public employee, local, state, or federal, makes starts with a business who hires workers to achieve profits by serving customers. And the better you do that, the more successful you are in the private sector. And the more successful you are, the more taxes you pay, and the more taxes your employees pay that fund charitable work and fund government work. So we should never forget that the golden goose is the free enterprise system that funds all of your incomes and all of your retirement and all of your health care benefits. The other thing from a premise point of view, I would just like to say is that one of the things that Richard said was that we have a revenue problem, and certainly Ralph has made a pretty good case why we have a revenue problem. I would disagree with that. We don't have a revenue problem because our tax rates are too low. We have a revenue problem because our economy is too slow relative to the rest of the country to throw off sufficient revenue. So I would love to see more revenue for the state. I would like to see it happen beneficially, where rates are low and lowered over time, but the pie overall, the economy overall grows. You have more people working and thus more revenue coming into the system, and that the golden goose is thriving. So yes, revenue problem. There's two ways to increase revenue. One is by changing rate structures, and the second way is by creating a competitive environment where we attract those entrepreneurs and those workers. To give you some idea on how people are voting with their feet, Illinois ranks 48th out of the 50 states at the rate at which people abandon our state to go to other states. And of course, people around the country like to say, well, they're going to Texas and Arizona and Florida where the weather's really nice, and that is certainly true. The weather does have a disproportionate impact. But we lose population to every single one of our neighboring states. We lose population to 43 of the other 49 states. And people are making these decisions the same way that, how many of you use coupons? Do any of you shop with coupons? Any of you shop around for a gas price now with gas over $4? Will you drive an extra 4 or 5 blocks? To think that people don't make judgments based upon the tax scheme and how that plays out in their own life is just insanity. They certainly do. And all of you are here because you're making those very same kind of judgments about your economic future. So I start with the same goal that I know Ralph shares, which is how do we fix the system for you and all the other people that are in the system? And we begin from a policy point of view with a very simple premise. We can debate the constitutionality, that is over my pay grade, and I think it's over Ralph's. Other people will decide this, and ultimately the state Supreme Court will decide this. But for the sake of our discussion, We support the policy that whatever benefits a public employee has earned through a date specific when reforms are passed, that should be vested. So whatever the deal is, if you've been working 10 years, 5 years, 15 years, 20, 25 years, whatever that deal is, whatever that amount is that you have earned, we think you should get that and that should not be reduced. The second thing we believe, though, and that the only way to resolve this situation, for many of the reasons Ralph talked about that ramp, is that ramp is too steep, and no matter what you do, it will be unaffordable. Even if you implemented exactly what Ralph proposed, it still would not work, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But we believe that for any employee from a date specific going forward, it is perfectly reasonable to reform and thus reduce the benefit scheme that the state is willing or that the local government is willing to pay an employee. Local governments are actually doing this already through a very interesting flexibility that they have. In local government, we have a program we call Best Practices in Local Government. The same things that you're experiencing, the same things the statewide system is experiencing, is happening in local government, actually has been happening sooner. Because local government doesn't have the borrowing flexibility the state does, and they also don't have the tax raising flexibility that the state does. So how have they been solving these problems? They've been solving these problems by laying people off. The village of Glenview is my favorite example because I live near there. The village of Glenview's head count, and I'm doing this from memory, but these are roughly about right. Their head count has gone from somewhere around 400 employees to down under 300, 454 employees to a little less than 300 over a period of years. Yet their total wage for those fewer employees is higher than it was when they had those higher level employees because of wage escalations, because of the contracts negotiated and signed off by political leaders and union leaders. Secondly, the amount of money they are paying into the municipal retirement system has also gone up, even though they have fewer employees. So how are they providing services to their village residents with a lower head count? The way they are doing that is by outsourcing and public-private partnerships. So one example is they outsource their IT department. They save $400,000 a year. That $400,000 went directly into making pension and wage payments. And they had a private contract to provide the service, ironically, with greater flexibility. When they went to have a bidding process, and so what they started doing is rolling forward a bidding process with their unionized municipal workers versus private competitors. What I thought was so fascinating is the fleet management unionized Glenview workers won the bid against private competitors and actually bid to provide it at a lower cost because they were responding to what was, in a sense, a market. And I think ultimately for job security and for long-term sustainability of public sector workers who truly, because I think the tragedy is how people are getting vilified on both sides of this. Public sector workers should not be vilified. I would vilify the politicians that have made these decisions and frankly union leaders who signed off on them knowing that, as Ralph has well pointed out, it's unsustainable. But the workers themselves should not be vilified, and the taxpayers, and especially successful and wealthy taxpayers, the ones who lived the American dream and done well, shouldn't be vilified just because they've been particularly successful. So that's kind of the premise I start with, and I'll run through the slides and jump back and forth on a couple of other thoughts. Ralph talked about debt problem. Let me give you perspective on the debt problem in Illinois compared to the rest of the country. That's $53,000 of debt per household for the state of Illinois as compared to the best states that you see there. Now you might say, well, if we implemented the proposal that Ralph has put out here, how would we look? The state that has a proposal that's the closest to what Ralph is proposing is the state of Hawaii. The state of Hawaii has $92,000 in debt per household, worst in the country. So I would make the case that a graduated income tax, as I'll run through this, is not the way to solve the problem. The way to solve the problem and grow revenues faster than those expense lines that Ralph talked about is to make this state the greatest state in the country competing for entrepreneurs and workers. And how do we do that? And that's going to be the basic premise of my presentation. I think that's a double of that slide. Oh, actually, this is the same slide with our number there, but this is all of our neighboring states, the people we're most directly competing with. And you can see what their debt per household is. Obviously, again, we're winning that race. One of the things that's ironic to me about Illinois, we're highest in all the things you want to be lowest, and we're lowest in all the things you want to be highest. You guys have heard these numbers, the vilification, not vilification is the wrong word, I don't want to overuse that word, the ridicule we get from people around the country. My friends in the think tank movement, the free market think tank movement, they make so much fun of this state at my expense on a daily basis, and it irritates the heck out of me. And I want to help solve the problem much the way Ralph does, but I just have a very different idea about how to do it. Here's a really interesting statistic, and it kind of goes to that ramp that Ralph was talking about. One of the things that Ralph talked about in his presentation I thought was right on the money was what we call the crowding out effect. That the growth in that pension payment ramp up, $5 billion this year, $6 billion next, 7, 8, 10, and 12, is crowding out core services. When Ralph showed you that slide about how services in real terms have declined over time, there's truth to that. But he only was talking about a small part of the overall budget. What he left out of that slide was the pension ramp up and the pension payment. So the reason that you see that crowding out of core services is because the pension payment is now consuming like a Pac-Man. For those who remember the game Pac-Man, I played a lot of that in college, loved that game. Pac-Man is now swallowing core government service dollars, and that's why you see the problem in the operating budget that Ralph was talking about. And here's a really good illustration of that. In 2012, approximately 1/3 of the state's K through 12 spending will go to fund retirement instead of funding educating our children. Without any changes to law, the current law is staying in place. By 2029, over half the money. Now you might think, well geez, this guy's a free market guy, this can't possibly be true. We put this out there, and Governor Quinn is now talking about this. Obviously a Democrat, has had tremendous support from the public employee union sector, and he has adopted this talking point that we have to reform the system if we want to educate our children. And then by 2045, when we get to that ramp that Ralph is talking about, 3/4 of the money coming out of the state is going to go to retirement run to schools. And so that's why both of us would agree you have to fix the system. How you fix the system is a different topic, but that's a very scary number. Here's another interesting number now to talk about the basic point that Ralph is making about we need a graduated or progressive income tax is one way to try to solve the problem versus what I'm proposing. In fact, what I am proposing is not only should we let the tax hike sunset on schedule at the end of 2014, that our state should work to eliminate income taxes altogether. There's 9 states without any income taxes. I believe that your pensions would be more secure, and future employees' pensions would be more secure if we follow the model of the 9 states without income tax, rather than following the model of those states that have a graduate income tax. And here's why I think that. If you look at job growth, that 0.47 is 0.47% growth in jobs among the 9 states with the highest graduated income tax. And this is versus in red, the 9 states that don't have any income taxes. 7.7% job growth over the period of time reflected here. Population growth, the states without income taxes are growing at 13.75 versus 6.48. Some of those states are clearly warm weather states, and that's why you always have to take that into consideration. But perhaps the best place to compare 2 states is comparing Vermont and New Hampshire and places like Massachusetts and Rhode Island. There's a massive migration of people going to one cold weather state to another, out of Massachusetts and Vermont into New Hampshire. New Hampshire has no sales tax and no income tax, and actually one of the best fiscal houses in order. And so you can see output growth. One of the things Ralph mentioned is that the expenses will grow faster than revenues. And that's true in part. Illinois is a slow growth state. Over a period of 10 years, I forget what the cutoff of this was, but Illinois ranked 44th in GDP growth as compared to the other 49 states. When you have, and revenues that come into government are direct, there's a direct relationship between revenues flowing per household and per business and economic growth overall, or GDP. We're at the bottom of the barrel in GDP growth, and that's one of the reasons we have slow revenue growth. If we were a high growth state, we would throw off more revenue per household. And you can see the comparison there. Ralph's plan talks about the $2.4 billion in higher taxes in 2015 from the progressive rates. And by the way, we took this directly from his own work. What he doesn't mention, that is very important to mention, is he assumes that current taxpayers will stay at 5%. So he's proposing a tax hike on everybody's taxes that would go back down to 3.7% when the sunset occurs. Remember, current state law is that the January 2011 tax hike was temporary.
John, that's inaccurate.
Well, Ralph, I did not interrupt you at all. I did
Just
not
say,
interrupt you
about
once.
my plan plan?
Did not interrupt you once. People can go themselves and look at your plan and look at what I've put out here. And if I made an error, I'd be happy to talk about it. But your plan talks about not sunsetting the tax hike. He talked about that little ramp. Remember when he talked about that little ramp that goes down temporarily, then it starts going back up? So and yes, and that's what's called a static calculation. So you assume that when the 2014 tax hike sunsets at the end of 2014, and you go from 5% to 3.75%, the way they make that calculation, it's called a static calculation in economic terms, not dynamic, is we would have, if you make that assumption, you would have definitely a fall of revenue because you're asking for 1.25% less. I'm not arguing that. Our point is the more you lower rates, the more economic activity happens over time, and you'll see a higher economic output and thus higher economic activity over time. So I'm not making that argument. The point I'm making is that the whole tax hike here is that there is $6.24 billion of the $8.64 billion that would come in 2015 would be from people who fall into that income range that currently are paying 5% and are supposed to go down to 3.75%. Those, which is the vast majority of taxpayers, as I'm about to make the point, those are the people that are going to bear the burden of that graduated income tax or the actual proposal, which keeps the baseline at 5. So, and here's the point. Ralph's plan is, increases taxes on 85% of filers because there is no sunset in his plan. And that's what I just was summarizing for you. We talked a lot about revenue, and I think there's an interesting discussion about revenue. What you see with the blue line is the total operating expenditures plus transfers out. I think Ralph's numbers and mine here are pretty darn close. Total operating revenues plus transfers in, and then the pre-Great Recession trend line for revenues. So what you can see is that we had peak revenues in roughly 2008 and 9. A part of that was stimulus money that came in. But even now, when you look at the blue line, as you can see, we're at a record level of revenues. The state is receiving more money per capita and in total than it's ever received before. So we like to talk about we have a revenue shortfall. Bottom line is we have more money coming in than we've ever had before. And in terms of taxes per capita, we are the 8th highest in taxes per capita. We're lower ranked in taxes as a percent of income because Illinois is still, relatively speaking, a high income state. We rank about 13th in household income. At one time we ranked 6th. And the reason we have fallen from 6th down to 13 is because that net out-migration statistic I told you about earlier. On average, people above the mean, above the average, are moving out and taking their income with them. And the people that are moving in are on average below the mean. So what that means is when you have your income, your average household income falling over time, that means per household income, the state is receiving less revenue per household. And that's why it's so important that we don't drive successful people out of the state. And these are difficult things to hear, and whether you think we should have a graduated income tax or not, we do have to deal with the truth as it is. And all the data I'm citing you is government data, or in this case, Ralph's, the previous slide, Ralph's own data. So we did have a deficit there, as Ralph points out. The question now is we're nearly back to where we were. How do we solve the problem of pensions and funding in general? One of the things that is very interesting, our chief economist, Dr. Lawrence McQuillan, came to us from California. And one of the reasons he wanted to come here is he wanted to share the story of what he's experienced in California. California has one of the highest graduated or progressive income taxes in the country. And what happens when you put that in place is it creates high levels of volatility. How many of you have been reading about the Facebook IPO and the anticipated revenue for California? They're counting tremendously. I forget what the numbers, it's $2 or $3 billion alone for what they anticipate in Facebook IPO related money once people sell stock and get a capital gains transaction. And the stock is plummeted. So by counting on that narrow band of taxpayers, it creates great volatility. One of the most important things, and I think we would all probably agree with this, that one of the most important things in government is to have predictability. Predictability, whatever level you think government should be at, we can all argue about that, where to draw the line. One of the things that's devastating to people who count on government, people in need, as well as the taxpayers who are trying to plan their business life and their personal life, is predictability. Volatility is bad for public policy, no matter where you are, left, right, Democrat, Republican. And California, as you can see here, has one of the most, this is actual numbers from California, one of the most volatile. Their volatility is extreme. So when you have an economic downturn like we have with the Great Recession, everybody suffers. But those who are most reliant on the high earners suffer more because high earners' money tends to plummet at a higher rate because they are so dependent on the economy overall. And we don't want to have that kind of volatility here. What we would prefer to have is sure and steady economic growth. This is just a little slide to give you some idea of the marginal tax rate on $50,000 of taxable income in states where there's progressive tax states versus Illinois. So if we did, you'll see Illinois there in the middle at 3.75. That assumes we allow the sunsetting of part of the tax hike to do what it's supposed to do at the end of 2014 and stay at 3.75. And you can see there, with the exception of Indiana and Michigan, ironically, Michigan is, by the way, experiencing robust job growth. I'm a native of Michigan. I've been here since 1985, but I still go back a lot. It's fun to watch what's going on over there. But it's more fun now than it used to be, I have to say. But you can see that our neighboring states all have higher marginal rates. The last thing we want to do when we have a competitive disadvantage with them is start to try to compete with them in the wrong way. Just to give you, again, going back to per capita income, we pay the highest per capita income of all of our neighboring states. I want to just run through a couple more slides for you that I think are sort of interesting. Then I'll talk a little bit about Adam Smith and proportion. By the way, I'll just give you a quote from Governor Quinn. Quote, "That's one of my goals before I stop breathing," meaning getting the graduated income tax passed. So Ralph, you've got a very strong ally in Governor Quinn for that. There are many other allies.
I don't know how helpful that is.
That's why I said it. His legislative success has been, I think, marginal at best. And there's a couple of interesting statistics for you that I will quote, but just bear with me because I'm going to a different presentation to get to it. Here's a good one. This is a picture of Paris Hilton. She looks so good there. I don't think it's airbrushed at all, really. No, not at all. Always sell progressive taxes. We only want to tax Paris Hilton. When California's income tax began in 1935, the 9% tax rate applied to people earning the equivalent of $838,000 annually in today's dollars. Today, California's 9.3% marginal top rate hits people at $48,000. The bottom line on this is we call that the grim creeper, because there's not enough money at the top of the bracket to fully fund everything that needs to be funded without reforming pensions in the public employee sector for future and for a date specific going forward. So let me just get to the Adam Smith quote, which will take me a second. It's on my phone. While we do that, I want to. Here's the Adam Smith quote. Okay. So Ralph likes to talk a lot about Adam Smith and taxing in proportion. So I just want to read this to you very quickly. Taxation in proportion to revenue is not a progressive tax. It's a flat tax. Think about proportion, meaning slice of the pie, relative to whatever your pie is. Proportional, not discriminatory, where you discriminate against high earners and have them pay a higher percent. It's a flat tax where everyone pays the same portion to the state. If Adam Smith had favored a progressive tax, he would have said something like an ever larger proportion of revenue. And there's a fancy economic term, I don't even know what it means, so I'm not going to read that. But it's important to know that the flat tax we have in Illinois, the rich pay a larger share of the total tax burden than the poor because their incomes are higher and thus they pay more taxes. And I'll give you some data on that in a moment. But Illinoisans with an annual base income of $1 million or more pay 47 times higher than a typical resident. And I think Ralph actually mentions that in his own report. Not only did Adam Smith not support a progressive income tax, he did not support any tax on income, with one important exception. Professor David Friedman, a scholar of Adam Smith's work, notes that in The Wealth of Nations, Smith successively rejects taxes on income from capital, taxes on wages, and taxes on the income of professionals. The only income he approved of taxing is the income of, are you ready for it? Government officials. So you should read The Wealth of Nations, and it's in The Wealth of Nations, and I just think given that Ralph and I always go back and forth on this, we gotta have a sense of humor about these things. At least I hope you have a sense of humor. You've been very kind to me, given that I'm the one that is throwing cold water on all the joy in the room. Here's an example of how the wealthy in Illinois are already paying an amazing proportion of the total cost of government. The top 0.6% of income earners in Illinois, by the most recent year available, pay 17.4% of all the taxes that come into the state. Now think about that. That is them carrying more than they're carrying their burden. It's done on a flat tax basis, but that is a heavy burden, 0.6 to 17.4. The top 14.3% pay 55.7%, and the top 37.7% of wage earners in Illinois pay 81.6% of the taxes. And so the point I would make to you, we have to solve this problem, and Illinois is in a desperate spot. But the way to solve the problem is not through class warfare and penalizing those who here are most successful. There are other ways to solve the problem, but the essence of America, the founding of America, is not saying somehow those people aren't doing their share. They're paying more than 80% of the taxes. We don't want to drive them to other states. Why on earth would we want to send another signal after the January 11 tax hike that you're still not doing enough? I talk to these people every day. We are funded, 80-some% of our money comes from individuals. A small portion comes from foundations, and about 0.8% comes from corporations. I talk to wealthy people every day. I had a meeting we did 2 meetings this morning with 2 wealthy people. And when you talk to them, it's amazing. If you could sit in those rooms and hear those conversations, you raise their taxes, it doesn't make a difference to them in their life and their income. They have tremendous resources, but they feel resentful that they are being the vilified person, that they are being made the scapegoat when they just pursued the American dream and did well. They don't want to be vilified any more than you do for being a public sector worker. That's not the way to solve the problem. The way to solve the problem is to face the reality of where we are today. Who's to blame? That's an argument for another day. I want to see Illinois become a high growth state. I want to see Illinois throwing off so much revenue that those spending caps, which are fake, actually come into play. I want to see so much revenue coming off into this state that because people are having economic opportunity, that this once again becomes a destination state. And we don't do it by penalizing the successful. We do it by lowering the speed bumps and the roadblocks to entrepreneurs who want to start a business and workers who want to partner with them to do something very simple, and that is serve customers. And I know that's true because I got into public policy here in Illinois 5 years ago. I've done 9 startups in my life, 2 of them in the nonprofit sector, the rest all in the for-profit sector. I am one of those people who built it. I am that guy that laid awake at night wondering how on earth I was going to make payroll, how I was going to survive the roof of my retail store collapsing and having to shut it down for 6 months while we rebuilt the building, wondering how I was going to make my debt payments, wondering how I was going to explain it to my wife. And when I was successful again and dug out of that hole, to be told I wasn't doing enough, it's devastating emotionally. It makes you want to leave. I haven't left because I think Illinois can be the great state, but only if we all agree that's not public employees, it's not taxpayers and entrepreneurs up and down the success ladder who are the problem. The problem is all of us holding our people accountable. Union leaders who need to tell you the truth, and politicians who are followers, not leaders, and they will only lead to the reforms that will get us out of this if you lead and drive into that solution along with the rest of us and care about the future of Illinois. Thanks so much.
We'll keep going here. Great. I would like to give Cappy and Ralph a chance to respond to John briefly.
It's already 80-1, Eric.
Okay, well, okay. But I mean, I guess it's one thing that Ralph, I'd like you to address in talking about what John said is the idea that, I mean, I think we all want Illinois to be a great growth state. And we would love to have this problem. It seems like John's contention is that it will solve itself organically if we just have enough economic growth. I'd like you to address that. And maybe Kevin, you could just tag team with him on that. If you want to just go first, right?
Okay, is this on? Can you hear?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'd like to say hi to Representative Ann Williams. Took some time out of her busy day to come here and dive into questions. I'm going to depart a little bit in my follow-up comments from the theoretical discussion that we've heard about the impact of various taxation schemes, and just recall for all of us that the rate of taxation in Illinois is set forth in the Constitution of 1970. and to change it would require a constitutional amendment. And to amend the Constitution, the electorate would need to vote by a majority of 3/5 for those changes. So we recently had a chance to amend our state constitution, and it was overwhelmingly rejected. So the solutions that are being put forward in terms of changing the income tax in our state to alter its basic structure has a political dimension as well as a theoretical or economic dimension. And I would submit to you, in my own personal opinion, and not now speaking for the University of Illinois in any way, that these fixes are not realistic. And what we need right now is to get this weight of the pension ramp and the other associated debts in the rearview mirror. We need to act in the next several months to take some decisive steps. I don't think that anything can be, the whole problem can be solved in a short term, because it took, as both presenters have noted, it took decades to get us into this predicament, and it may take a while to get out of it. But I think what we need to do practically is to seek the solutions that address the problem most directly. Now, in my experience in state government, 30 years, proposals that try to solve a multitude of problems in a single stroke have not fared well in the Illinois General Assembly. So there have been proposals in the past that tied up increases in the state income tax to property tax relief. It hasn't gone there. Every time you add a layer of complexity to a legislative proposal, you're adding a layer of opponents to your point of view. So I would just hope that as we proceed into the dwindling days of the 96th General Assembly, that there be a laser-like focus on solutions that we think are practical, and that we recognize that while we may not solve all of the problem that the state faces in one fell swoop, I think we need to keep focused on the pension problem as a problem that is critical to the economic future of the state of Illinois. So I give it to my esteemed colleague.
Yeah, well, I'll agree with your closing words. It's critical, but it is a debt repayment problem. And if we don't have the revenue to repay the debt and fund services, we won't repay the debt. So the bottom line is, you can tinker around with benefits all you want. I think we showed that the two more aggressive proposals that Quinn has put on the table, if they become law, still don't come anywhere near solving the problem. So if you don't deal with the pension ramp as sort of the immediate first step, flatten it out to a annual payment that the state can afford to make. And if you think about that, that's like your mortgage is structured, right? It's a dollar amount per year. The reason the bank sets it at that dollar amount, it's one that it knows you can pay. It assumes that your income will go up a little bit over time, and that after inflation, the burden of making this payment over time goes down. So the combination of your income going up, inflation driving the cost down in real terms, makes it even more livable in the future. We did just the opposite with this pension ramp. We made it ever increasing in a way that just outstrips inflation, outstrips income. So that's got to go. If that's not on the table in the pension reform proposal, then we'll be here next year and next year and next year and next year talking about different ways to cut pensions and why the state is broke. So that has to be on the table. Number two, we still need the revenue to pay our bills. And so the first thing I'm going to say is, John, you actually got our proposal on the graduated income tax completely wrong. It cuts taxes for 96% of the taxpayers in Illinois. And no, that's not static calculation. We ran that through the dynamic modeling system of the Illinois Department of Revenue. So we ran our proposal through the Illinois Department of Revenue. Their numbers say, using a dynamic model, that based on actual Illinois returns, 96% of the Illinois income taxpayers would pay less. 96%. So you should look at our proposal in a little more detail, and you really shouldn't criticize it unless you have a good, accurate understanding of it.
Well, I would just
Now moving forward. Now I'm going to move forward. One of the claims made here today, and there are a lot of claims that really aren't data-based, but some of the strongest ones that John was making to make his case is that if you raise taxes on affluent people, they go running out of your state. That Illinois will hurt itself competitively if it in fact raises taxes. And that a supply side sort of view of the economy, if you lower taxes, especially the wealthy, that will free up economic activity by allowing them to invest more in plant and equipment, employees, research, development, all that stuff, which trickle down, grows the economy for everyone. Everyone gets growing wages. And so therefore, even though you're cutting taxes at the top, you're not losing revenue at the government level. sort of the basic of that. Number one, the migration tied to tax policy myth has been completely exposed as just that. There is no correlation. I would suggest you look at the meta-analysis done by the very respected Center on Budget and Policy Priorities out of Washington, D.C., which shows that the reasons people move, number one, is due to things like family concerns and housing prices, and number two is the weather, and tax policy at best plays at the tiny margins, but no statistically significant way. So there's been a nice meta-analysis done of this research, completely debunking the myth that there is a correlation statistically between tax policy and migration. If in fact there was, you would think people would be running into Illinois, because as John showed, our tax rates are actually lower than our neighboring states or most of the rest of the nation. And in fact, tax burden as a percentage of income, according to the Federation of Tax Administrators, and what that is it's just a collection of the people who actually work in state government and do the audited reports of the tax data, and they report it to this federal collector who reports it out. According to the Federation of Tax Administrators, Illinois has consistently, over the last 25, 30 years, been one of the lowest taxing states in the nation, including all state and local taxes and fees. So you include everything, any level of state government could charge any individual, whether it's called a tax or a fee. We've been in the bottom 10 for decades. And despite being in the bottom 10 for decades, and as John's slide showed, despite having a lower tax rate than our Midwest neighboring states, they've outperformed us economically. So the lower tax rate certainly hasn't purchased any competitive advantage for Illinois. It has, however, constrained fiscal resources at the state level so severely we haven't been able to invest in infrastructure, we haven't been able to invest in schools, we haven't been able to pay our bills to private providers, and we've raided the pensions and borrowed against it to fund services. So once again, it has created some problems. Then there's the supply side economics argument. Okay, the theory is, as I laid out, you cut taxes at the top, and that will free up the investment of these individuals, the job creators, I think is what George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan and you referred to them as, to invest in plant, equipment, employees, et cetera, et cetera. That will lead to a growth in economic activity, higher wages for everybody, and reduced deficits as everyone pays more in taxes. So from the end of World War II until 1980, America had very high marginal tax rates at the federal level on individuals, topping out at 91%. So that's a pretty high marginal top tax rate. I mean, obviously, it staggers up to there, not all income. During that period of time, average growth in America's gross domestic product, our economy every year was about 3.4% after you adjust for inflation. In real terms, that was the growth. And I gave you the slide. Also during that time, the wealthiest 10% in the nation realized about 34% of all income growth, while the bottom 90% got 66%. So that was the distribution in income, that was the growth in GDP, those were the tax rates. Beginning with Ronald Reagan's administration in 1981, we started experimenting with supply-side economics, and the top marginal tax rate for affluent individuals was reduced from 90% to 38%. And then in George W. Bush's administration in the year 2001, that top marginal tax rate again was reduced down to 35%, capital taxes were cut, and the estate taxes were cut. These are all tax cuts that significantly benefit the people at the top of the income ladder. So what was the change in the economy? Well, instead of increasing economic growth, and by the way, I'm only going to give you data through 2007. I'm not going to include the Great Recession because obviously the Great Recession would make any period of time look bad. They call it the Great Recession for a reason. So this data ends in 2007. There's only 1 month of the Great Recession there, December of that year. Average GDP growth in America declined a full percentage point, from 3.4% to 2.4%. So rather than stimulating this magic growth in the economy across the board, in fact, it constrained economic growth by a full percentage point a year across the nation. That's hundreds of billions of dollars less in growth. Not surprisingly then, it didn't trickle down, it sort of trickled on. So the bottom 90% saw their share of overall national income over this period decline from the 66% that they enjoyed up until 1980 to only 34%. That meant for 90% of the country there were flatter declining incomes after inflation, 90% of the country with diminished purchasing power. And And of course, since there wasn't this significant growth in either economic activity overall or in the incomes for most people, the cut in tax rates at the very top helped contribute to the massive growth in deficits at the federal level. And in fact, and I don't know where the number is now, we haven't done a calculation, but 2 years ago into the Obama administration, about 43% of the federal deficit was either the tax breaks for the wealthiest in America and or the interest on the debt to finance those tax breaks.
Eric, am I going to get a chance?
I just want to make sure that this doesn't turn into a meta-economic seminar.
So, it's a good
response, but I do want
with facts.
And I'd like this. No, I'm not taking issue with it at all. I'll let John do that. But I just want to make sure that we focus more narrowly on this pension issue because I mean, let's look at, and I think let me just ask you to finish up by saying, well, okay, who is going to have to suffer or bear the burden? That's the hard choice that has to be made.
The politics is clear. Benefits will be taken away. No question about that. This is a political process. So even though benefit increases, the design of the system didn't really cause the unfunded liability and material part, and we'd be substantially greater funded if in fact we hadn't rated the pensions, we'd be close to 90% funded today. The bottom line is we're not. We're in the low 40s. I think it's 43%, Amanda, is that right? Amanda Cass is our pension expert over there. Wave, Amanda, so everyone could ask you very specific technical questions and she'll answer them all. So we're only about 43% funded today. And so in a political environment, the beneficiaries of the system are going to have to pay. That's just going to be on the table. But if that happens and it is sold to taxpayers and voters as a solution, but they don't change the ramp and don't raise the revenue necessary to actually pay our obligations, I'm telling you, it gets much worse. Because now voters believe a problem's been solved that hasn't been solved.
Okay, now that doesn't, I mean, it sounds like that might not be politically doable. One of the things that Kathy was saying, that she thinks that kind of reforms, and let me let John jump in here because, and then
Wow, that's awful nice.
I'm sorry, I just want to I didn't want this to get spin out of control until.
No, I want to actually drill back down to, there's so much that Ralph said, you know, just because you make an assertion, whether I make that assertion or you make that assertion over your coffee with a neighbor or your nearest potluck or whatever you do in your neighborhood, or Ralph makes an assertion, it doesn't make it true. You should all be skeptical of everything all of us say, myself included. But ask yourself this simple question. When you go shopping, when you buy gas, when you think about when you bought the house you bought, did you look at what the property tax burden is going to be at this house versus a different house? Did you make decisions on that basis? Everybody makes decisions on that basis. Take away the supply side rhetoric and what happened here and there. The bottom line is this state needs more revenue. No question. How do we get it? Do we get it by raising the cost of operating your life and business life here for people who are producing the revenue and everybody up and down the income scale? Or do we raise revenue by making Illinois an unbelievable place for entrepreneurs, investors, and workers to come together to create businesses? And the reason I cite the 9 states that don't have an income tax is because those states are outproducing the other states, because it's just one way to make a state more competitive. But there are many, many ways. There's many problems in Illinois besides tax policy. We're hostile to entrepreneurship. I talk to people who are running companies you would know, names you know, and they tell me the amazing story of what it's like to call the governor's office to try to get a factory approved, and how long it takes, years. Whereas they go and call Governor Daniels, and he'll fly over, and they can be open in 6 months or less. And this happens over and over and over again. There are many, many complex problems. But the bottom line on this is Ralph is correct. Benefits for a date specific going forward for current employees have to be reduced. There's not enough money. One of the things I found so fascinating, I was a business guy most of my life. I spent most of my life in business, was just fascinated by how the public policy debates and the lack of quality in the public policy debates. And I'm just flailing away here trying to do my part of this. But the truth is so important. The reason that the progressive tax is being proposed, for the reasons Kathy cited, is they never think it's going to pass. Do you think a 3/4 majority of the people in the state are going to approve a progressive income tax? I don't think so. Even though, it seems popular, I don't think you get to 3/4. That's a very difficult threshold. But the reason they're putting it out there is they don't want the tax increase from 2011 to sunset. at the end of 2014. And the reason they don't want that is that slide I showed you. If it doesn't sunset, it's about $6 billion in additional revenue for the state that would otherwise go away. And they don't want to do what needs to be done to get that revenue made up by having a pro-growth, pro-economic policy agenda. It's easier to say, things are so tough, yeah, we can't do that progressive tax, but well, guess we'll just have to make that tax like permanent.
But
that's what the game is.
John, if it does sunset, isn't that doing what you want? I mean,
I want it to sunset.
I mean, it seems like what, I mean, it seems like
I
what
do
you're,
want it to sunset.
well, but what you're saying, what you're telling us here is that there's not necessarily any pain in the future if we...
Oh, no, I'm not saying that. I've been focused on the pensions, but we put out a balanced budget every year. We call it our Budget Solutions Series. This is our third year of doing it. We're the only ones who do it. And every year we propose, it's getting harder and harder because the people in Springfield keep digging the hole deeper and deeper. When we put out our first Budget Solutions in 2009, it was relatively easy to fix the problem, and very difficult. But compared to today, it's much tougher. But our Budget Solutions, you've read there, every year is a balanced budget and makes the full pension payment and reformed spending. You cannot fix this problem unless you have a material and dramatic reform to Medicaid, to education, and to public employee compensation. Because Ralph is correct, 91% of the dollars are those four things he talked about.
Is he also correct that we're, in real dollars, we're 23 to 25% down from where we were 12 years ago?
I haven't looked at that slide, but what he left out of that slide was the pension payment. So, but there's no question, and we would actually support this, is that operating spending outside of debt and pensions is down. And the reason it's down is the point I was making in my presentation about the PAC plan, because pension costs, borrowing related to pensions, the premium of the $500 million referred to earlier, Eric, all of that is consuming our record revenues at a higher proportion, slice of the pie, than what it used to. So that is crowding out, even though we have record revenues, the ability to deliver services in the traditional way we deliver services. And I'll just give you one very quick example to illustrate this. In 2000, we had 1.5 million people receiving Medicaid benefits. Today we have 3.1 million people receiving Medicaid benefits. That's a 104% increase in the number of people receiving Medicaid benefits that are taxpayer subsidized. And the reason is that we purposely, through the Governor Blagojevich, frankly, and some Republicans went along with this, purposely incentivized people to drop private insurance. Over 1 million people came out of the private insurance market and moved into taxpayer subsidized market. And you know who those people are? Middle class people. People making well above the poverty line. We now spend less on the poorest, people at the federal poverty line and below, than ever before. We're down, I think it's 37% of our Medicaid spending is on people who are poor. Most of the rest of it goes to people who are middle class. This is insanity as a public policy. We have to refocus all of our core services on the people most in need so that we can afford to make the reforms that we both would agree need to be made while reforming benefits in the out years.
Okay, I wanted to ask a question that I think is probably on the minds of a lot of people in this room, which is, how worried should current retirees be? Put this to all three of you. How worried should these current retirees be that their benefits?
They should be very frightened, Eric. Dick Ingram, now don't take my word for it, Dick Ingram runs the teachers retire. How many of you are teachers? Any teachers in here? Dick Ingram, you know who he is? He runs your retirement fund.
No, he doesn't.
Well,
We're in service.
Service, okay, I'm sorry.
It's TRS.
Right, TRS. So I misunderstood what your hand one up meant, and I may not have asked the question artfully, but he runs TRS. And we've been saying, and not just us, many people have been saying for many years that the money was going to run out. And everybody was saying, no, everything's fine, including Dick was saying everything was fine. Well, he finally admitted that the money's going to run out if something doesn't happen. And you should be worried. And let me make one more comment about why this is such a moral dilemma for rank and file members. Because taxpayers can move. If they don't like the way the solution is, they can move, and they're moving. Public employees have been counting on that. Rank and file public employees counting on that retirement. It doesn't matter if you move. If the state runs out, you are out of luck. That's why you should care. Whatever the solution.
Ralph?
Yeah, so
No, I don't.
I'll let Kathy have this.
Kathy, go ahead. I'm
I
sorry.
am not of many words, so give
Okay,
me a
that's
few.
fine. No. Sorry.
So our system, the state university's retirement system, SURS, is administered by a really wonderful guy named Bill Mabe. And our fund is somewhat better funded, thankfully, than the teacher's retirement system, which is the largest in the state of Illinois. And I think that when Ingram's comments were published over the summer, and keep me honest on this, Linda Burkhardt, but I think that there was a study done by SUAA that found that our system, which is not a wonderful comfort to all state employees, but our system is in fact solvent.
Do you want to understand also?
That's exactly right. So, and I think the constitutional guarantee, if you look at the Arizona Supreme Court case recently on this issue, Arizona has a constitutional clause almost identical to Illinois' on pension diminishment and protection, and it was held. And so their benefits were in fact protected. So I think a significant portion of the scare tactic, at least for this audience, is not really on point. But I do think intelligent changes have to be made to both tax policy and that pension ramp if you're going to get out of this problem going forward. And so if in fact the skin that workers, whether they work for the universities or the employee retirement system, TRS, whichever one, if they are asked to put skin in the game, I think there's a couple of concessions that ought to come back. Some of those concessions include changing the ramp and re-amortizing the repayment of debt, because that's what's really driving the problem anyway to a realistic fashion, number one. Number two, I think that there ought to be, and Representative Fortner put this in his legislation, some sort of enforceability, a mandate given to the retirement systems to force the state to make its actuarially determined contribution every year. I think that would be an intelligent reform going forward. Another part of Representative Fortner's legislation that we thought at CTBA made some sense. The state didn't just borrow that big pension bond issuance under Blagojevich. In 2010 and 11, we borrowed to make a contribution. Did we borrow to make it in 12 too? No, just 10 and 11. But so we issued mini bonds in 2010 and 2011 to make our pension contribution too. Those bonds are going to be paid off in a period of years. Representative Fortner said when they are paid off, don't put that revenue back into the general fund for general purposes. Instead, segregate it and use it as a source to pay your pension obligations. Well, that's a logical utilization of that targeted revenue because it's already going to cover pension debt, if you will. Why not keep putting it towards pension debt? So there are a number of things you can get that are very rational reforms. Now, as to the economic performance of the 9 states without an income tax versus the 9 states with the highest income tax rates, a study done by the Institute of Tax and Economic Policy in DC showed that from 2000 to 2010, median wage was higher, growth was higher in the high tax states than in the no tax state. GDP growth per capita was greater in the high tax states than it was in the no tax states. And unemployment rates were identical. Meaning that if you cherry pick economic statistics, some will show the high tax states very much outperforming the no tax states, and some will show the no tax states very much outperforming the high tax states. The reality of that, you could have correlation without causation if you know a lot about statistics a lot of time, and I think what that really shows is there's truly no causation between state tax policy and major economic changes in your state, because state taxes are not the primary taxes that businesses or individuals pay. In fact, we did an analysis of all corporate income taxes paid by all corporations in America to states as a percentage of their taxable income. So this is after they took out all their deductions. This isn't gross income, right? This is their taxable income. It's only 2.3%. It's a de minimis number. It's way overplayed. And once again, another context thing that I think is important. Illinois has a $650 billion annual economy, $650 billion GDP. The net tax increases CTBA believes we need to put on the table are roughly $6 billion, $6.5 billion, or about 1% of the economic activity in the state. That is such a small amount of the economic activity in Illinois that there's been no peer-reviewed econometric model that can even review whether or not it has an impact. It's too small.
I definitely want to let you respond to that, but I want to preface my question by saying that it seems like that we are in agreement here in this room that there is a big problem that goes back 30 years at least of irresponsible politicians not making these payments, and that we need more revenue. somehow to get this with different interpretations of where we're going to get this revenue. So that's where there's agreement here. I want to know, and I'll let you answer what Ralph said, but I also want to know, is there agreement on the political lay of the land? Because all of this conversation is fascinating. I mean, we can go on for hours, and I'm really interested in what you guys have to say, but I don't know. I'm just let John talk first. And is what's going on in Springfield? What sort of will or lack of will is there to do anything? And so when you're looking at those people down there and over there, what are they going to do? What are they, realistically, what are they going to do?
Well, I'll answer the last thing first, and I'll address the point Ralph made. I'll try to be brief, because I know that getting a word in edgewise with Ralph and I here is very difficult. But I think on the word count, Ralph is outdoing me 2-1, by the way. And I also should mention that Representative Tom Morrison is here as well. Tom, wave your hands so people can see you. Tom is a good friend, and Tom has the best interest of taxpayers at heart, as do all the people in Springfield. But the difficulty with both the rank and file members in both chambers, as well as leadership, is one of the things that's been just amazing to me is how politics actually works. Basically, there's three things that drive political decision making, and I've had these conversations with many people in Springfield privately. I don't know if those of you here will respond to this, but political expediency, it's deal making. Political fear, I'm terrified someone's going to come after me, or bad things will happen to me in the public. People write bad things about me. Eric Zorn will say I'm a bad person in his column. That's not good, and you know that, Eric, because you hear from them when you write those bad things, and you know they don't like it. And thirdly, political principle. Are they guided by a tethered set of ideas? And there are honest liberals and honest conservatives in Springfield who are tethered, and I don't know you, but I know Tom, and I know that he has a tether to the guiding principles. And so until you marshal the will among people and influencers and the body politic who vote, they won't do what needs to be done. That's what I meant earlier when I said in the end they're followers. Most of them, not all of them. There are some people down there that are doing some brave things. But in the end, they're followers. They're not leaders. You have to lead as a citizen. All of us have to lead for the solution. So that's my answer to that. Going back to the $6 billion out of the $650 billion economy, that's true, but I want to address another thing that Ralph did. This is how we all use numbers to make our case. Ralph showed you a 34% deficit, and that was a key predicate to make the case for the progressive tax. And he showed you that $9 billion number there in past due bills, as if that all had to be paid off in 1 year, along with all those other numbers, which are annual numbers in that slide. Am I mischaracterizing that at all?
The $9 billion does, because it's got a time limit on it.
No, let me point out that the state has been running somewhere between $3 and $8 billion in past due bills, year after year after year, and rolling them over. And most of that $9 billion is that kind of debt, and it shouldn't be paid down. But are you saying that $9 billion you talked about the Medicaid bill and you had two numbers in there?
It's actually not primarily Medicaid. It's a lot of human services
Right,
providers, small businesses.
So there is no
small businesses located across the country.
Fair enough. We should all go look at that slide in our own time, because that $9 billion, a lot of it will be rolled over as it has been year after year after year. And all I'm saying is it inflates that for 34%. I'll get off the mic in 1 second. The $6 billion proposed, we can come back to that. I'm going to give it up in a second. I want to address the $6 billion out of a $650 billion economy, as if that's a drop in the bucket. That's as if $650 billion is a big pile of cash that is readily available. That's not what that money is. It's sort of like when you look at my retail business. I had a multi-million-dollar small business, several $1 million. And if you talked about increasing my taxes by $30,000 to $40,000, out of that it sounds, wonderful, easy for you to write that check. That's not how it worked. I paid for cost of goods sold, I paid for labor, I paid all the things. And when you drill down to what I had left, you're talking about a huge chunk of my disposable income to reinvest in the business and perhaps open another location or open a new business. That $6 billion is out of working capital, not out of the $650 billion, and that's why people leave. So now back to you guys.
Okay, what I'd like to do here is, this thing on yet? What I'd like to do is, since we're running this on time here, I would like to give each panelist 3 minutes. We'll get us right up to 1:30. Each panelist 3 minutes to sort of sum up what they'd like to say, what the takeaway is here, and if there's anything you can tell people like what they should do, like what if you're going to write a letter to your state rep, if you're going to tell them to write a letter to their buttonhole one of these legislators here in the room and tell them, what would you tell them you want them to do? So in 3 minutes, let's go. We've got a stopwatch.
Why don't you start with John and move backwards?
Let's start with Kathy.
I'd like to, before we get into closing statements, just clarify what this, I don't know what all is in the $9 billion debt, but the University of Illinois is owed at this moment in time to over $200 million. And how this has gone in the last couple of fiscal years is that the General Assembly will appropriate an ever-decreasing amount of money. We were down from an $800 million appropriation in 2002 to a little bit more than $600 million appropriation now. And we have the good fortune, or bad fortune, as our parents may think, to increase tuition to close that gap. We're not able to do that to ever higher levels, and many people are starting to worry if that source of making our ends meet has come to its logical end. But so what's happened to us over the last couple of fiscal years is that the General Assembly will make an appropriation, but in the fiscal year they haven't been able to fully pay it down. So they pass a bill that extends the fiscal year by a couple of months, and usually by the end of that extended period of time they paid us off already. But in those months they're not current on their payments, and so the debt accumulates again year after year. That's the payment spiral that we've been in. Second point, we're not in agreement on tax policy, Eric. The university has no particular tax position per se. We do hope, though, and now I will kind of cut to what I would end with, we desperately need to get this pension question resolved in a way that we hope is fair to our current employees and that provides a particularly better attractive offer that we can make to new employees who come in under the Tier 2 plan. So the takeaway, I guess, for us is please act swiftly on this, and please act to remedy defects in this Tier 2 plan. Thank you guys for coming out today. You've been a really wonderful, receptive audience.
I want to go last. You want to go last? Want to go last? Sure, go ahead.
Well, might as well go last. I mean, I think we've got a pretty good flavor for it. One of the things that Kathy just said is they can't raise tuition unlimited to solve the problem. And why is that? Because they will lose students. If you raise costs too much than what the customer can afford, they will not come to this school, they go to a cheaper school or not go to school at all. There is not an unlimited tuition burden that anybody can pay. Think of all of you. Why do you own the house you do and not the one in the next neighborhood over that's more expensive? You respond to economic incentives, and this state is no different. So one of the things that I think is important is I'll just close with using one of Ralph's analogies. And just look at your heart and how you live your own life about tax policy. That bank that Ralph referred to and said when they make bad loans and they have a debt problem, is it right to ask the employees to make up for the bad decision-making of the bank officers who took on all that debt? No, it's not right. It's not fair. Absolutely not. It isn't. And sometimes life isn't fair. But the bottom line is those employees, if they want to stay employed at that bank, are going to be asked to sacrifice for the long-term health of that bank. Taxpayers are being asked to sacrifice. They just absorbed a $7 billion tax hike, and some would like that sacrifice to increase. Employees, all of you are going to be asked to sacrifice in terms of your retirement benefits. There's no question you're going to be asked to sacrifice. Some of that debt that Ralph is talking about is going to be written down. The real question for all of you to think about, is it going to happen in such a way to pop the political balloon of pressure, but it doesn't really solve the long-term problem? Or are we going to go along as a result, kind of like the status quo of how we got here? Or are we going to do the structural reforms, not just to pensions, not just to tax policy, not just to our competitive environment in terms of regulation and overall taxation and why entrepreneurs don't come here the way they come to other states, Medicaid, education funding, public safety, healthcare services? Are we going to do the comprehensive reforms we need to make Illinois a competitive state with the other 49 states, of the 50 states? And if the answer is status quo solutions, we are going to continue to be in an economic death spiral. All of us, you, me, us, we have to be part of the solution. We want to see Illinois return to the prominence it deserves. And I encourage you, it's not by penalizing the productive.
All right, so two things on closing. I mean, number one, on the pension situation, I would say, and I've said this, I hope, very clearly, the pension ramp has to go. And the debt has to be re-amortized out over a different period of time. There has to be a flat dollar amount payment every year that the state can make. The state, however, if you want to fix the long-term problem that led to the underfunding of the pensions in the first place, needs to modernize its revenue system. And from this standpoint, I will, for maybe the one and only time ever, agree with John. and that is status quo ante doesn't work. So what do we know about what Illinois has done in the past? We've been one of the lowest overall taxing states in the nation for 30 or 40 years. What has that led to? It's led to an underfunded pension system, cut in core services, and a slow-growing economy and inability to invest in infrastructure. Is there a way to fix revenue policy that would keep us economically competitive, yet allow the state to pay its bills, make its pension contributions, and invest in core services like education, infrastructure, etc.? And the answer is clearly yes, but it's not by continuing the current tax policy. It's by making tax policy match up with the data. And one thing we know is the supply side approach to tax policy has been experimented with in America for 30 years and has been completely disproven. It's an interesting theory. It hasn't worked for 30 years. And in fact, you go to the prior period before we experimented with it, when we had high marginal tax rates at the federal level, we had a faster growing economy and faster growing wages for all of America. Illinois needs to learn. The public sector has to make some core investments in things like education and infrastructure to attract high-end businesses and high-end jobs. Just has to. We can't make those investments with current tax policy. If we modernize it, Illinois would still remain in the bottom of 15 or 20 states in overall tax burden as a percentage of income. It'd actually be able to pay its bills, make its pension obligations, and invest in building the kind of human and physical capital that will attract high-end businesses. So the choice is, keep doing what we've done in the past. We see where that's led: poor economic growth, massive deficits, and a hugely underfunded pension system, or change things, recognizing what has and hasn't worked.
Before you leave, we have one other item on our agenda today that we're going to ask you to fill out a small exam on the basis of today's discussion, and then I'll ask George Balch, who knows about this stuff, that can do a quick analysis of all this. Well, thank you very much. We much appreciated this. I hope that somehow we're not going to keep coming back to the original title of our first panel, that is Fixing the Mess. I think
They're on schedule to be back here in 2018. So.
But anyway, we much appreciate this. I think it's a very good discussion today, and UIC United wants to thank you. We have small tax-free gifts to pass out to you. And
I'm not an elected official. I can take it.
Okay. We have no elected officials. But anyway, well, thank you very much for coming. We have some light refreshments outside here in the lobby area. And we hope that we can continue more discussion at that time. Thank you very much.